This may very well have been the best episode of Mushoku Tensei yet. Well, for season 2 anyway. There was a little bit of action, lots of that signature Mushoku Tensei drama, then most importantly a faithful, well-paced adaptation of the story. So, while I do still have plenty of cut content to talk about, it's not so much related to events skipped over from the episode, but instead events they skipped which happened before it. Things like the inevitable war coming to Asura, or how it is Rudy got over his abrupt departure with Sarah and Counter Arrow. Let's get started. Episode 28, Letter of Invitation, covering the prologue in Chapter 1 of Volume 8 of the light novel. After yet another tragic tale of misunderstanding, Rudy would spend a year accompanying Soldat all throughout the Northern Territories. He would jump from town to town and do pretty much the exact same thing that he did in Rosenberg, temporarily join parties in hopes of spreading the name and story of RUDEUS. At first, Rudy thought Stepped Leader wouldn't be so receptive to him, but to his surprise they were actually quite welcome. Since a lot were brought in under the same circumstances that he was, they were rather respectful with regards to how they treated him, not only understanding his purpose for being there, but also giving him the distance he needed to be himself. Occasionally, Rudy would think back to how things had ended with Counter Arrow, but with zero news coming back to him about what they were up to, he could only assume they either got new members or just went back to Asura altogether. As for his thoughts on Sarah, well, that was something that he'd come to regret. Just like how Sarah wished to apologize for the way things ended, it turns out that Rudy wanted to as well. He felt if there was one thing that he could go back and do, it would be to talk to Sarah one last time just so they could settle things properly. Knowing how much of a distraction Counter Arrow was to his objective though, Rudy knew it was for the best that he didn't. He didn't seem to realize it at the time, but the friendship he'd made with them had caused him to become complacent. They were the sole reason he wasn't able to move on from Rosenberg. So, despite regretting not saying anything, the stress of trying to seek forgiveness just wasn't worth the hassle of staying behind for them. To him it was far easier to just move on. Not to mention productive since his primary goal was to search for Zenith after all. This could very well just be his excuse to make himself feel better, but the truth of the matter was that relationships like that were unnecessary now. If he had time to worry about girls, then he had time to search for Zenith. And it was that way of thinking that would take all the weight off his chest. So, as he would occasionally remember his first times with Eris, Sarah, and Elise, it was the imperative nature of the job at hand that made it easy to let go of all his regrets, thus helping him to spread his name more effectively. Now, something I forgot to mention from last episode was the interesting bit of foreshadowing left out from ELINALISE's post-credits scene. You see, before she had even gone to interrupt these two adventurers, they were first talking about the dire state of Asura, a reality that was hinted at by the shabby state of the guild itself. It's not something that was made quite apparent, but if you were paying attention, you would have noticed just how empty the building was. It was just these two, an elf and a receptionist. As for why that is, well, that would be due to the poor state of the kingdom. Asura was very close to the brink of destruction. Not only was it evident on the faces of its people, but it was a well-known rumor that High Minister Darius was eager for war. You see, when a country's backed into a corner and low on resources, war usually becomes their only option, especially for a prideful one that considers itself the strongest. So, with the state of the kingdom in tatters, the people were the ones currently suffering. They were so entrenched in their own problems that they couldn't even afford to seek out help from the Adventurers Guild. Thus the reason the request board was barren, and so too the building itself. Plus, with so few adventurers coming through and visiting, any requests that did pop up were mostly ignored. It was a massive slump that further alluded to Asura's imminent downfall. Now, you may not remember from my episode 0 cut content, but this was actually something Ariel's mage predicted would happen. At first, Asura was this powerhouse everyone thought would conquer the entire continent, but when they saw just how hard it was to live in the north, they instead decided to settle in the territory they already had, leading them to stagnate while those on their borders advanced. So, while those around them made progress in both magic and technology, Asura went on to produce nothing. They instead chose to indulge in the prosperity of their own natural resources, consuming and consuming until, well, there was nothing left to consume. With this bringing them to their current path of destruction, it was only a matter of time until war broke out. Either them or their neighbors would be the one to start it, but whatever the outcome, those at the top were sure to be replaced. Only after the dust was settled and a new monarch in power would the adventurers finally return and do their job again. Reason being that should any remain when the war begins, then any and all would be stuck in Asura until after. So unless you wanted to be caught right in the middle of that, then the best option was to flee before the borders closed. As it would turn out for these two adventurers, ELINALISE would provide them with such a great night that they would completely forget their earlier caution and linger within Asura until that very war started. A story that's apparently saved for a different time. Now, one last thing that pertains to the political affairs of Asura is the disbandment of the official search and rescue squad. After 5 long years and a whole lot of money, the minister Darius had finally decided to cut off funding for it, effectively declaring the whole displacement incident over. Of course, that was far from true, but whatever refugees remained finally began to switch from searching for survivors to reclaiming their livelihoods. It was a sudden decision that came as a direct result of Eris being declared dead. With all other Boreas Grey Rats confirmed dead as well, Darius saw zero need to continue using the search and rescue squad to find them. So feel free to take that information whatever way you want, but just know that I doubt Darius was looking for them just so that he could rescue them. And obviously Eris isn't dead, but it's definitely best that she be considered as such. Fast forward now to present day, and Rudy would still show immense infatuation towards his muscles. To him, so long as he paid attention to them, they were sure to never betray him, unlike a couple of other women he knew. So he would wake up and do his training, eat a massive meal despite it being expensive, then pray to his relic the same way that he always did. This would be his daily routine for the past year or so. Normally he would then go to the guild and join whatever party on their B to S ranked missions, but today a familiar face decided to recruit him instead. An S-ranked adventurer we know as Soldat, who we find out is advanced in the Sword God style and intermediate in the Water God style. As the leader of one of the many high-ranked parties controlled by the Thunderbolt clan, he was currently looking for an additional mage to assist with the dragon slaying quest, a hunt for a stray worm that was causing quite a bit of havoc nearby. Normally, such a job would require a minimum of at least 40 adventurers, but today they only had 25. It was a diverse group that consisted of 1 S-ranked party and 4 A-ranked ones. The thing is, with only half of what was required to even attempt the quest, many were nervous about whether it was even possible or not. There was this looming sense of uncertainty that caused one of the parties to back out immediately. So, with 21 left and more about to leave as well, Soldat quickly stepped in to prevent that. He wasn't about to let such a massive quest slip right through his fingers, especially not one with such an immense payday on the line. So, before any other party could announce their departure too, Soldat declared that those remaining would be the ones committing, and he had done so with such an overwhelming authority that no one present would even dare step in to say otherwise, thus leading these 21 on an adventure to slay a dragon. The fight was pretty much as we saw in the anime, but in case you're wondering about any of the specifics, it was essentially a 1v1 with Rudy the entire time. The dragon immediately recognized Rudy as the biggest threat, and as such went to eliminate him first. Rudy, being the intuitive fighter he was though, not only took advantage of his environment to create a smokescreen out of fire and snow, but also ran the opposite direction of his party so that all the others could have time to flee. He would then protect himself with a wall of water, then launch numerous earthen bullets so strong that even the dragon became afraid of them. You may not have noticed, but it was actually in this moment the dragon knew he messed up. It had come to realize just how powerful Rudy was here, and as a result turned to flee since it knew now Rudy couldn't be beaten, leading itself straight into Rudy's quagmire previously intended for the Luster Grizzlies. With that cementing the dragon's fate, Rudy would remain humble and allow all those present to share in his bounty. Of course, they all knew that he had done everything, but Rudy insisted they share in the riches anyway. It's not like he could even carry it all, and leaving the body to rot could potentially have it turn into a zombie dragon later. It was in the next scene with Rudy at the pub that we find out the people singing his song was a troubadour called the Big Boys Orchestra. A C-ranked party whose skills weren't quite noteworthy, but their passion for music was evident by their desire to become famous for it. They had recently quizzed RUDEUS on his adventure with the dragon, then quickly made it into a song in hopes of being the first to do so. It certainly wasn't the best song he'd ever heard, but their ability to create something new based on events RUDEUS recounted for them was a level of creativity he knew he'd never be capable of. Back when he was still in the real world, there was a time when Rudy had tried to create a song on Vocaloid, but after that failed miserably and killed his self-confidence, the only instrument he'd ever claimed to play after was the ass drum. something I'm sure you don't need me to explain. In any case, it's everything after this that follows the anime quite closely, probably the closest we've gotten from any episode in Season 2 so far. ELINALISE came in and told Rudy where Zenith was, then his main concern became figuring out how he was going to get there. It was a task indefinitely delayed by the winter. So while he stayed put waiting for the season to pass, we would learn more about him and his particular condition. As it turns out, the longer his useless friend remained unusable, the more he became overcome by these feelings of loneliness and helplessness. Then the more times he tried and failed to fix himself, the more he came to realize this wasn't a problem that someone else could solve. It was a sad realization that ultimately led him to just give up. Now, one of the things the anime didn't really showcase was the more personal details that developed ELINALISE's character better. You see, other than just being this sex-crazed elf lady, she's also an S-ranked warrior who's actually quite caring. She's definitely not on the same level as Ruijerd, but from the few elimination quests Rudy had taken on with her, she had shown quite a bit of skill befitting her S rank. Then we already know how capable she is around men, but when it comes to women she becomes more like this older sister to them, often giving them advice ranging from that of relationships, all the way to how to handle themselves in combat. If there was one single rule she always abided by though, it was that she would never seduce any man who was already involved with someone. If she could tell that they already had a partner, then she would stay away as to not cause any sort of lover's quarrel. Of course, there would always be the few men who become infatuated with her, but that would rarely, if ever, turn into bloodshed. Even so, her notoriety had caused her to become quite well known across the central continent, so much so that there was actually an unspoken rule that she couldn't join anyone's party. At least not unless it was under some special circumstances anyway. In any case, ELINALISE would be the adventurer Rudy would party up with. Since she insisted she would stay with him until he was safely in the Begarit continent, Rudy saw no issue having a reliable partner travel with him. If there was one thing that the past 2 years had taught him, it was just how difficult it was to travel alone. So, aside from the times that she would invade his personal space, having this strong warrior as a companion was certainly helpful. Now, the last thing worth mentioning was a whole excerpt from Rudy's letter about some kind of research project. Apparently, if he's able to complete one project within the 7 years before he graduates, then the Magician's Guild will enroll him into their ranks as a C-ranked member. Of course, under the condition he transfers all the rights of his findings to them. Even if he isn't able to complete one though, so long as he graduates he'll still become a D-ranked member. I'm not sure what exactly these ranks do for him, but I'm sure obtaining one is quite prestigious. For reference, the mage Rudy had gone to talk to here was only an F rank, mainly because he was a dropout. So, this could just be a way for the university to benefit off the research of their students, but there could also be some merit to it. Regardless, it's an interesting proposition that adds yet another element to Rudy's time at the university, something I'm sure they'll bring up next episode. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this episode's cut content. There was one interesting line Hitogami said during the dream sequence, but the implications of it are too vague to really speculate on. It was just something along the lines of how he couldn't reach out to Rudy because a lot was happening on his end. Then the reason ELINALISE was in his bed after was because she couldn't find a single person to sleep with her that night. It seems whenever she returns to bed alone, she finds herself lonely and unable to sleep anymore. So that's why she had gone over to Rudy's bed. Anyway, if you liked what you saw and want to see more, then be sure to let me know in the comments and like the video. Until the next one though, as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!